Hey everyone, it's Book of Katherine. I'm glad to have you with me. Today we're going to do a rather unusual, well not an unusual one, just a straightforward one. It's unusual because I have notes. Because I don't want to forget anything because it's a very important topic. A very popular one, isn't it? I am on the Underground Railroad. As you can see behind me, for those of you who are new to my channel, this is the Underground Railroad portion of this trail. So otherwise known as the Freedom Trail, where slaves escaped their masters from the south to the north and the west. So I found out that my house is really close to a portion of the Freedom Trail, and I didn't know that when I moved here from California. So I feel very, very lucky. And I am just learning to walk again. So I was not even in a wheelchair. I was bedridden for about 10 years. I used to be very, very active. I used to travel all the time, and I was even a champion dancer. And then I got really, really sick and a lot of accidents and injuries in my spine. And yeah, I was bedridden for about 10 years. And I am just learning to walk again. I got a bunch of spine procedures. There is the view. Isn't that amazing? And so I am using what I can to do what I can and talk about all the things that I've learned while I was in bed. I used my active mind to I was kind of stuck in bed and had to basically listen to politics. That's all I had was my screens. And so I listened to my screens and I watched my screens. And so I was like, you know, I really need to find out about this guy, and the Nazism and the Nazis, and find out if Trump is really a Nazi. And so I want to share with you today if Trump is a Nazi or not, and let's compare. And then I'm going to let you decide if he's a Nazi or not. And I'm just going to let you I'm going to go ahead and talk about, just share with you the research that I found on Hitler, and you can go ahead and Google it yourself and go ahead and do your own research. I'll just share with you my research, and then you can go ahead and look it all up yourself. It's just going to be facts. And then you can decide for yourself whether or not Trump is a Nazi. And then you can decide for yourself if you want to impeach him and vote him out. And the nation's under a serious threat, and the world is under a serious threat. It's a serious threat. And the white supremacy is real. And there's a global threat, the whole 9 yards. So I'm going to share with you what that is. So if Trump is a Nazi, the whole 9 yards. So here we go. So let's start first with Hitler. I'm going to just give you the facts of what happened in Hitler's, I don't know what to call it, presidency, chancellorship, whatever, in Hitler's reign. And then I'm going to share with you some things that's happened, that Trump's done in his reign. So like what Hitler's done in his reign, and then what Trump's done in his reign. And not things that they've said, like things that they've passed, just so that I can just share solid facts, because the newspapers on both sides said a lot of things, and I don't think that's fair. You can find a lot of things, and I want you guys to be able to find this stuff online and just, you know what I mean, look it up for yourselves easily, and you can compare and make up your own minds. Does that make sense? Okay, so I want to do actions. All right, so here we go. So Hitler. So Hitler, so his donors, right? So his political donors, start with that. So his political donors, first of all, his party started in a small pub. He is the National Socialist Party, right? Nazi Socialista, National Socialist Party. But he wasn't the only one. There was a bunch of socialist parties back then. But his party got famous because, and you can look that up, they had a plaque on the wall, and now it's a little fire or starter plaque or whatever. But they got famous because they had this big fight in a pub. And but they got backed by this really, really famous thing called BASF. Super, super famous. In fact, it was actually global by then. It was this, they actually had, you can look it up online. They actually came together and called themselves IG Farben. And he got like 38 million Deutschmarks from them. and they funded his campaign. And IG Farben was 12 chemical companies in Germany. So he basically got backed by like really the best, like he got more backing than any other political opponent. And so he won. And so there is like the German, basically the entire industries of Germany backed him, and the industries were run by the banking. And so like he got back, like he got the big dogs backing him. But something that you show, so like as BASF, AGFA, Casella, Bayer, like Bayer Pharmaceutical. BASF, like I said, is the chemical company, but that's been around since 1865. Like that's been around for forever. So that had been around for a really, really long time. And they try to break those guys up in World War I. Some people, I mean, you can look them up for yourselves or whatever. But they came back together and formed themselves. And that's why Hitler said, you know, we want to bring Germany back together because they broke it up in World War I. And what they did, if you look into the Treaty of Versailles, is they broke up the German chemical industries because it was a globalist empire. It had gone completely across the world, and it was this massive empire, and into the Ottoman Empire, and World War I Treaty of Versailles broke them up. And so they came back together and formed themselves in kind of like, how do you call it, conglomerate, and became what's called IG Farben. And then they funded Hitler, and they said, you know, we want you to bring Germany back together. And what he said was, we'll bring back the Prussian Empire, which is uniting Germany again. We'll bring back the Prussian Empire. And that's why when you read a lot of when you go on and you start researching this, you're going to find that a lot of people who do Nazi, who are Nazis, because there are Nazis out there today. I mean, you'll find a lot of Nazi fan sites, but they'll refer to Germany still as Prussia. And that's why they do that, because, you know, Hitler was like, we're going to reunite Prussia. We're going to bring back to what was before World War I. And they broke it up because of these chemical empires, right? So, but you should know that probably that BASF and Bayer are both around. And they're both the leaders in the climate change movement. So if you go onto their sites, they both have Twitter profiles, BASF and Bayer. You go on there, they're global sustainability. They both have green. So they're the leaders of the climate change movement. And all of the climate change things are based, like if you look it up, the Knowledge Empire is, the actual headquarters is in Berlin. The knowledge base is in Berlin. And so, and all of the climate change regulations actually benefit German manufacturing. So like everything that's done in China, like the pollution in China, it actually is killing the polar jet stream, like the jet stream, but it's BASF that's doing it. Like it's that controls all those sites and everything. So BASF is still around, and AGFA is still around, and Bayer is still around, Bayer Pharmaceuticals. So all those Nazi doctors that did it and created Zyklon B, that was a Bayer company that did that, and Bayer doctor that did that, and all these horrible tests that they did. But they all run the climate change agenda. And if you want to compare with Trump backed out of the climate change agreement. So you can compare and contrast if you want to do your chart and compare and contrast on whether or not he's a Nazi. You can go ahead and do your chart that way and ask yourself that. Also, you should know that Bayer went ahead and bought Monsanto crops, so they also own the corn crops. So like the sugar crops and everything like that. So when you hear things like the corn crops are killing the earth and sucking out the CO2 in the air, and when you hear all like the billionaire newspaper magazines saying we need to go vegan, that's to build up their corn crop empire, to build up the sugar empire. And I mean, it makes sense. It's just advertising. That's why you hear all the songs on the radio. In my opinion, this isn't fact. Like, this is my personal opinion. But now when I hear songs on the radio, it makes sense to me when it's like dip yourself in Oreo. But that's my personal opinion. You can set that aside. I haven't even begun to dig into that research. So just set that aside. Okay, so then let's look into Hitler's policies. So then Hitler made the concentration camps, right? He had the death camps. So he had his death camps, but he didn't run his death camps. Companies ran the death camps. These are the list of the companies that ran the death camps. They were actually labor camps for companies, and these are the companies that ran them. They are Ford Motor Company, Krupp, the coffee maker, Volkswagen, Siemens, the one that does all the electricity that you see around you, Juncker, and about 25 more companies. I have listed that on my website, bookofkatherine.com. But they fund libertarian, like the Cato Institute. They fund GOP, and they fund Democrats. but they don't fund, none of them donated to Trump, but you can look into that for yourself. And they heavily fund the climate change agenda. Heavily fund the climate change. They're all green. Simmons is green, sustainability. They look into that, you'll see as global sustainability. The big climate change, the UNFCCC, what they do is what's called as sustainable development global goals. If you've heard of global goals and everything, it's all the same thing. And they developed this thing. Anyway, you can look into it. But they do climate change, and Trump pulled out of the climate change accord in Paris. But anyway, so that's been going on way longer than Trump. You should know that. That's been going on since 1972. Really long time. The royal families got that started. Swedish king began it with Gunther, Gustav the Sixth Adolf. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, I already told you about that. The National Social Party is famous for Intro 5 first day. Oh, and so what he did is when Hitler became chancellor, first thing he did in office was remove everyone's rights, not just the Jews' rights. His first day in office, he did Third Reich laws, and what he did was he removed the rights of all citizens of Germany. All citizens of Germany lost their rights. They lost the guarantee to all rights, all citizens of Germany. So then they did, after that, after all citizens lost their rights, what they started doing was rounding up anyone who disagreed with them. So basically anyone who had dissent. And then they started doing things like Jewish laws. But you should be aware that the Jewish laws only extended to if your grandparents were full Jewish. All of these families like BASF, AGFA, like BASF was the Rothschilds. That's the Rothschild banking family. Like they're Jewish, but their Jewish roots go back to the 1500s. Their grandparents weren't full Jewish. Things like that, you know what I mean? So like you kind of have to go deep into the laws, and you can look into that. That's on some of the sites. And you can obviously say, anyway, you can go ahead and look it up for yourself. But you can see right on their Twitter profiles. So there's a difference between what Democrats today call is Jewish. Like we have all Democrats today say if you have one drop of blood in you, then you are a certain nationality. Kind of like when the KKK was around and they said if you have one drop of black blood in you, then you're black. That was the rule that the KKK had for black slaves, that you could be enslaved. But not Hitler didn't do that. He said that you're only Jewish if your grandparents were full Jewish. And by that standard, less than 1% of the German population was Jewish. And so that's why they had to round up, in order for these labor camps to run, they rounded up like 65% of all gays, journalists. They just rounded Christians up. They just rounded political dissidents. For example, here's a great one. Chanel. Coco Chanel had her, she tried to get this guy she did a bad business deal with. She was really pissed at her deal. She did a bad deal with him. She wasn't happy that she negotiated poorly. She got her into the American market, which is great, but she got only 10% cut. She wasn't happy with that later. She wanted a bigger cut, but the guy was like, no, you agreed to 10%. She's like, well, I want a bigger cut, and he didn't agree to do it. And quite frankly, if I was the guy, to be honest, I've done enough business deals now where I'm like, if I was the guy, I would have said, no, I got you into the American business market. Like, are you kidding me? I'd have been like, make another perfume. I'll give you a bigger cut of that. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. I know how the business world works. But because she was with the Nazis and they had a great amount of power, she actually made a move to take his entire business out of spite. And you can do that. Like, power does that to you sometimes. But, you know, so Nazis just did that. It happens. And Nazism is basically upper class versus lower class. When you got guns, you got power, you get to end up, you know, doing things. And people say it's anti-Semitism, but I think it's just, you know, labor. But that's my personal opinion. So anyway, make your chart. Because, I mean, Trump's family is Jewish. He's not Jewish himself, but he has descendants that are Jewish, and he has extended, like his ex-wife was Jewish, and so his kids are Jewish, and then his daughter ended up converting to Judaism and stuff like that. That's why Modi, people say, won't shake his hand and things like that, because he has history with anti-Semitic parties. Anyway, so that's all. That has nothing to do with things that they've passed. Okay, so, you know, if one drop is a rule, like by the one drop standard, like they, anyway, that's a totally separate thing. Let's go into what Trump has done. Okay, so these are things he's actually passed. Sorry about that. Oh, look, I can bend. I can bend. I bended. But you can see that turned me white a little bit. I apologize. I need to catch my breath. That hurt. I so apologize. I need just a moment. Sorry, I'm not that healthy. I walked to distract from the pain. Okay. Woo. All right, we can do this. Okay, so things that Trump has done. Okay, so here's the Trump column. Prisoners. So as far as labor camps or prison camps, well, he actually right now, well, before the presidency, when you left prison if you were in prison, he actually passed prison reform that a lot of black Democrats had been trying to get passed for a long time. And you can even talk to some black newscasters were saying that they were shocked that it actually got passed. But the thing that people I found out about just through my research that no one's mentioned anywhere on the press, I haven't seen anywhere, is he actually instilled a right to work policy, which is that the Labor Department actually instilled a right to work labor policy. So when you go to your stores now, and if you've noticed that the clerks have suddenly turned really great, like the clerks are suddenly much more attentive, and they're suddenly like, if they're counting out things and they're trying to be very careful about the way they count things out, and then they're very happy when they count it all out, they make sure everything's counted, and then when they have it all counted, they hand it to you, and then they're very happy, and they're like, yes, and they give it to you, and then they're like, oh, and they're like, so nice to meet you, and they shake your hand and everything. That's because prisoners who get out now, it used to be where, do you remember that when it said, have you ever been arrested on your employment work form? And you fill that out, it was like you couldn't get a job anymore. There were all these regulations, unfortunately, from the climate change regulations that we had from back in the 60s, that eliminated from the UN. I mean, it's the UN's fault. And honestly, the GOP did it. It's not just the Democrats who did it, but the GOP and the Democrats did it. And it's just all about money. But the thing is that, and I think it's just global. I mean, it's just the billionaires, right? It's just the billionaires trying to get cheap labor. So anyway, these guys, the thing is that they come out of prison, and what happens is once you've been in a life of crime and then you pay for it, and you do the time, suddenly you value your time. You don't want to go back to prison. Suddenly you really want to work. And they've done interviews with these guys, and you can look it up for yourself. But the employers are saying that these right-to-work guys are the best workers they have. So the employers are actually really grateful for it. You can look it up. So you can look that up. That's not an action. It's just a right-to-work or something like that the Labor Department put into play that Trump asked for, and they were able to get it. And so that's a second part of the prison reform. They get the Prison Reform Act passed, and then another thing was the right-to-work. A Second Chance Act. That's what it's called, the Second Chance Reform Act or whatever he wanted to get through, and it got through, which is a big deal. And then second of all, veterans had lost their civil rights. A bunch of their civil rights had been stripped away. So he restored a bunch of veteran civil rights. If you go to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, a bunch of veteran civil rights have been restored. He started holding religious persecution summits. Religious persecution has really increased across the globe for all types of religions. Like every type of religion has started being persecuted. And so he started holding religious persecution summits at the White House and started employing certain things to combat that, and also freeing some persecuted, like doing some negotiations to get them out of their jails. Like in Iran, it can get really bad. Middle East, it can get really bad. Christians beheaded, Jews decapitated. In Africa, it gets there's ISIS in Africa. ISIS in the Middle East, I don't know what numbers there are on that, but Africa, it's bad. It's really, really bad in Africa. So just slaughters going on. And so those things are happening. And then the single moms got the biggest tax cut. 70% tax cut was the largest tax cut that occurred. And then the 1%, the top 1%, the billionaires of the world finally got that 1%. They got that tax loophole closed. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but well, actually, no, I know you didn't, because it was really hard to find. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the research that I had to do. I was reading these articles and I was like, am I reading this right? The headlines would say in Forbes, it would be like, you know, Trump does this. It would say one thing, but then you'd read the article, and the article would actually say, he actually did this, and it would break down all the details. And it was like basically all the billionaires knew that he closed the article, and they all knew to ignore the headline and just read the article. So the article would be exact opposite of what the headline said. I was like, what the anyway, so basically there was that tax loophole for the 1% that the Obama administration promised to close. I don't know when it happened. I think it happened in 2099. There's this huge tax loophole that was given to the 1%, the capital gains tax. And basically all the billionaires use that. That's how they make their income. All of their income, like you and I get a payroll check. We all get a payroll check, and that's how we get paid. Not the billionaires and the trillionaires. They all invest in tobacco. They have all their money in tobacco crops, sugar crops, things like that. And so their money instead is in Wall Street. And so what they do is they get their investments by getting their capital gain. Like they actually just get their gains from Wall Street. All of their incomes, like for example, Warren Buffett, his entire business is Berkshire Hathaway, which by the way owns Quora. I had no idea about that, but it owns Quora. So you just judge for yourself whether or not the answers on Quora are actually real, or whether or not they're Warren Buffett telling you what he wants you to hear. So for example, he said the royal colors were blue, which is the Queen's British Navy, which, you know, is the Bank of England, and kind of like her entire empire kind of runs the world right now, kind of runs China. And then you look at all the paintings, like I've been to the museums. I remember when I used to travel, and all the royal colors are red. And I'm just like, I don't understand. I'm so confused. Like, look it up. Like all the royal colors of the Pope and this and that and King Henry VIII. I've been to all the Shakespearean plays. All the colors are red. But of course, you know, like can't have that color. It's just really, really odd. And then the second color is green, and that's the color of the UN, the color of climate change. So I don't know, it was just an interesting thing I found in my research. Anyway, so, but they all get their money through capital gains, which is like Wall Street. Well, so all of their incomes were getting the lowest tax rate in America. And Warren Buffett actually said that. He said, my secretary is actually taxed much higher than I am. And he bragged about it. Like he actually said that. He went and did interviews and said that. But the problem is that that's what they ran on. They all ran and said that they closed it. And then they passed every single climate change regulation except for that. They didn't close that loophole. They did everything except for close that loophole. They even increased all of our taxes, but they didn't close that loophole. And that's what that tax bill did. It actually increased it. It actually increased their taxes quite a bit. There's a worm. Not used to living things. Besides my kitties. I need a minute. That was a really big West Coast worm, not a California worm. And there's a bug in my eye. Oh, it's because I said something about Warren Buffett. He must have heard me and sent his minions. About capital gains. Anyway, so their capital gains tax went up from something like 12% to 23.3%. Something, it went up. And anyway, so be aware of that. Or something, it wasn't, I don't think it was super huge, but it finally, the loophole got closed. And now they're paying what the other Americans are paying, like corporations are paying, basically. All right, so also he put in school choice. He's trying to get through school choice, which is something at least the conservative side I know has been asking for. I've only just heard of it. I was a teacher. I hadn't heard of it. I was a teacher in inner city schools. I hadn't heard about it. But apparently she has this huge school choice thing where if your kid is struggling in school, she offers something that's tax-free to Americans and allows you to transfer from state to state, school to school, or do an online program, and allows any kind of celebrity or any kind of person to sponsor a program to have kids do a different alternative program from the school, which is basically run by the UN, the UNESCO at this point. And but no one's talking about it, not even the conservatives, not CPAC, not nothing or whatever. But he has that up there. So school choice is something I know the conservative side, I've learned, has been asking for, and he has a huge proposal out since January. So that hasn't happened, but it's something out there. And then finally announced the... I can't understand this is why I can't write. My hands don't work. Announced land purchased of border to veterans on Christmas. That's right. Okay, so Afghanistan is actually safer than the border, and he purchased the border. No one knew this. He had been keeping the border apparently really tight. Like, I didn't hear any announcements about the border when I was doing my research. And then all of a sudden I was watching this Christmas announcement to the veterans, and he did this blur out of nowhere, and I only just figured out what was happening is that the veterans were getting a feed for Christmas. They were all seeing it, which means basically he was not to the veterans, but it was all to the military workers, which means basically the news couldn't edit it out. They heard it direct from him that he had done the land deals for the entire border. So the U.S. had already made all the purchases with all of the landowners, which apparently I don't know how they did it that fast. It was last year. Was it 2018? But all of it had been made. Like, it's the USA owns all the land on the border for the wall. Like, it's already purchased. It's all done. And I didn't know that the border was more dangerous than Afghanistan at the time. So I didn't understand at all what was happening. I understand now, now knowing that it's more, I mean, I put it all together recently, but he announced it for the military on Christmas anyway. So you can take that for what you will, like, but that's like what he does on a day. Like, that about summarize is a day. In a single press conference, I can barely get out what he does in a single press conference. It's very difficult. That administration moves at such a fast pace. Like, in one announcement by one, they have like 30 administrations or whatever. The government is so huge, and like one announcement saved taxpayers $565 billion in one announcement. And I can't keep up with all of that. So I just wrote what was off the top of my head, and like I forgot that one. Anyway, so you can go ahead and decide for yourself if he's a Nazi or not, and line that up for yourself. And that's that. There's the research, and go ahead and research for yourself and do it in a column. And the only other thing I'll say is that it seems to be, with the other research, is there was a bill. The Nazis seem to what they want, and what the BASF and AGFA, and what they seem to fund right now is this thing called like free market capitalism. They don't want any restrictions on trade, which means no human rights restrictions on trade, which is what they had in Nazi Germany. They had no rights, so they could have their labor camps, slave camps, and that's what's happening in China. You can look it up. There are slave camps in China right now, slave labor camps in China where they have organ harvesting and things like that, which is why they are protecting it so hard. And they even have those kind of things in California and things like that with the migrants. They have those exact same conditions with the 28-hour work days. I lived in California. I saw it. So anyway, so anyway, so it's up to you if you think that's yeah. And and on the other side, like, the Trump administration is trying to do e-verify, so that, you know, that your workers have to be verified, and so that they can catalog and make sure things are going by regulation at every workplace. Yeah, so that's just, you can go ahead and see, you know, if you're living up to the human rights standards that Americans have in the workforces in each company. So anyway, so you can decide for yourself. That's just the research I have on whether or not Trump's a Nazi. I mean, I know Nazism is extremely profitable. I understand the slave trade's extremely profitable, and that's why the royal families invest in it, and that's why the billionaires invest in it. I understand that. I understand that it's extremely profitable. But it's up to you to decide whether or not Trump is a Nazi. So anyway, that is Freedom Walk number on the Underground Rail Trail, in honor of the slaves that were freed by abolitionists before. Love you guys. Peace out. Bye.